All right. Bonjour, Inanem, Julia Lafreniere and Indigenous cause, Camperville Dungi, Treaty 4, Ni Baba Joe Lafreniere and Indigenous cause, WAG-Qaumajuq. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Julia Lafreniere. My family is from the Métis community of Camperville, Manitoba, located on Treaty 4 territory. I'm the head of Indigenous initiatives at the Winnipeg Art Gallery, Qaumajuq. I'd like to acknowledge that the Winnipeg Art Gallery is located on Treaty 1 territory. The Nahiwak and the Anishinaabe were signatories to that treaty. The WAG is also located on the unceded territory of the Dakota and the Dene nations, which means those nations didn't enter into treaty agreements with Canada. However, the territory is still theirs. The WAG is home to many Inuit artworks, and Northern Manitoba is part of Inuit territory. The artworks in our collection are both permanent and on long-term loan from the government of Nunavut, and I take the role of the spiritual care of these artworks very seriously, as I recognize that they are not on their homelands, and until they go back to their home, I take care of them in the proper ceremonial way while they're here. And there would not be an Inuit Art Center or Qaumajuq without these artworks, and so I'm very grateful to them and their makers. The water that the Winnipeg Art Gallery receives is from Shoal Lake 39, which has been under a boil water advisory in order to provide the city of Winnipeg with clean drinking water. And I begin by saying all these things because Canadians cannot continue to be ignorant to the reason we're able to live and exist on these lands today. And the reason we are able to is because of the original caretakers of the land, the Indigenous nations. And the reason the WAG is able to exist is due to the Indigenous people that cared for the lands and the waters for centuries. And the reason that Canada is able to exist is due to the exploitation of these nations. So we can't forget that, and we must actively work to deconstruct these systems in our lives and everyday work. So I encourage everyone here to think about the ways that we maintain the status quo in our lives and therefore perpetuate the systemic racism in Canada, and think about ways that we can disrupt the status quo. I'd like to thank all of the knowledge keepers that participated in this Artworks Renaming Initiative: Victor Tzazazi, Brett Hewson, Martha Pete, Wangbadi Wakita, and Pahan Pesamwin, who is here tonight and will be speaking about the project with us. I'd also like to thank the project sponsors, the Manitoba Arts Council and MyTax. So next, I'd like to introduce Dakota grandfather Wangbadi Wakita to make opening prayers so that we can have an open mind and heart and begin the discussion in a good way.
Thank you. I like your words. The more times we say that, the more the truth will come out. And that is what we're dealing with, is wanting to deal with the truth, the true history of this land. Thank you for getting us involved in this. We have some words to share about the people of the land. Again, the new information that came out was there will be no fighting on this land. That was a ceremony 2 weeks ago. That way things will work out. It's different when you make a prayer in front of this camera. I ask you in your own way to help me make prayer for all the things that are going on, because it impacts people, it impacts the components, the activities of what's going on in this. And there's a connection, that's for sure. And we try to learn how it's connected. Us, we learn about our heart, our mind, our body, and our spirit, and how we use that on a daily basis. Today, we're making prayer for all around healing, strength, emotional strength, mental strength, physical strength, spiritual strength. We need that in today's world that's going 150 miles an hour. That Creator has ways of slowing this world down, that's for sure. And we see that every day. We say thank you today and an offering to be set out so that our spirits, the ones that come to help us, they can eat because they're the ones that do that work. Tukashira ato kantaka. Amitaka ikidana o pakawita o hiuta kapi o heche. Ede o chutompo. Tako astekta ichon kumpu chipicha. Oidena chanku wajiwaste. Uyaki pasupte. Aya peta doha uihamde doha na. Chanku duta kinderakan maunikte. Kawichone wichoza nikte. O shake woi honi. O akhbar wo wamshira. O spe wo kakneke. Tukashira ata kantaka ukuya hito. Adana mitako ikawa wicha kawa ushicharo. Tako da dustamta chipi heche yecha wichaki chakta. O shivicharakte. O piri chichiro. Ayadechach. Kawita hiata kavatako este hundustam. Uchika pion heche. Dana ikche chasto yatika na yapa. Kaya api. Shundapo. Oya mitako eke. Tiwahe tioshpa wotako eke na. Atoke ki he gashana ere uchato na ija. Taku odepe ni chechenaka. Wichayo ashte wichayo akon shivichara wo. O wichakio. O na wichaho. Echaho chiche. Pidama pido tokashira ato kantaka. Okay. Ai pikede. Ai pirakcha. Ukuya unkia takaba yupirakcha. Itosh unki uzikia oyakapta echach. O chichia pido. Pida oya pido. Chanteo steon kupo. Tako ste chunkupta echache. Unchika picha. Chantege taha peti yohia chantege taha tako stekta cha echache. Etaha. Amakantera karma unipta. Echacho chichira. Unshimado. Unshimado. Honamahoe. Honamahoe. Omitakewas. All my relations. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, miigwech for those words. So we will now get into the story of the Artworks Renaming Initiative. And we're framing the discussion as a story so that you all will have a good understanding of how the project began and then what happened along the way and then how it's ended. So I will just spotlight my panelists here this evening. And I'll ask them all to introduce themselves to you. As I mentioned at the beginning, my name is Julia Lafreniere. I'm the head of Indigenous initiatives at WAG-Qaumajuq, and my role for this project was to, I guess I was the project manager, I would say, for this particular project, but it was really important to me that we had the input of many people involved at the WAG, because when doing this type of work that's not necessarily been done before, everyone has their own perspectives. And so I find that involving as many people as possible in the project always makes it better. So my role was project manager, and then I will let my panelists introduce themselves. Maybe Katrina, if you want to go first.
Yeah, hi, my name is Katrina Barsky, and I am a master's student in the curatorial practicum field and at the University of Winnipeg, and I also work as the digital media administrator at the Winnipeg Art Gallery. It's a pleasure to be here.
Nicole, you want to go?
Hi, I'm Nicole Fletcher. I'm the registrar at the Winnipeg Art Gallery. And my role in the project was helping find some of the works initially, and then more of the record management and helping Marie Anne with some of the initial research and art handling.
Marie Anne, do you want to go?
Tanzania Totamak, Marie Anne Nitisinagason. I am Marie Anne Redhead. I just recently graduated from the University of Winnipeg. And I was, I guess, the researcher for this project. I was kind of coordinating different aspects of the project.
Riva?
Hi, I'm Riva Simko. I'm the head of collections and exhibitions at the WAG-Qaumajuq. I kind of oversee the collections in general. So my role in the project was a curatorial and advisor in a way.
And I guess that leaves me. So my name is Paha Ptesawi. I'm a grandmother, and I make prayers for people in the community. My ancestors are Lakota, Cree, and Métis, and my involvement in this project is we were invited, my husband and I were invited in, along with those other grandmothers and grandfathers and elders, to give a name to the pieces. So you're going to hear about that in a few minutes. So I'm glad you're here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to mention to the panelists that there was a couple times during the project where my heart really sang with joy. And I know that our guides were whispering in our ears and guiding our paths. So I just wanted to thank you all for joining me on this incredible journey for this project. It's just really been something else. So we'll start at the very beginning. And I think it's important that we all have this understanding about what is a collection and what does a collection mean to galleries. So maybe Nicole and Riva, maybe that's a question for you guys. So what is a collection?
Yeah, so I can start. In really broad terms, an institutional collection such as the WAGs is an assemblage of artworks and objects that are held in public trust for future generations of artists, creators, researchers, historians, communities, and general publics to enjoy both in the present and in the future. But collections also reflect a long history or series of relationships, relationships between the institution and artists, between the institution and collectors and donors. And they reflect a narrative about the changing visions, mandates, and goals of an institution over and across time, right? As well as the interests of the directors and curators who have worked at and come and gone from the institution, and in turn, their relationships with artists and curators and donors and communities. So that's a simplified way of defining what's actually a very complex set of historical fragments, you could say.
So why do galleries have collections? And do all galleries have collections?
No, so not all galleries have collections. And artist-run centers, for instance, don't often have collections necessarily, galleries that are focused on contemporary art or not in acquiring art or focused on exhibitions and programming alone don't have collections. Collecting institutions have collections, right? And the WAG-Qaumajuq is a collecting institution. And, you know, we collected because the art has to go somewhere. I mean, the history of collections goes back to the Renaissance, really, with elite families amassing objects and artworks from their travels and from their home provinces as marks of distinction and promotion of their own families, right? And in some ways that history was then really cemented with the rise in popularity of cabinets of curiosities over the next few centuries. Again, wealthy elites collecting objects from the colonies. And certainly collecting institutions now still carry that long colonial history within their collections. And of course, this project is one of our small ways of kind of addressing that colonial history in the spirit of reconciliation, but also in the spirit of what Elder Wakita was just referring to in his prayer, that spirit of healing, right?
Mm-hmm. And so maybe talking about the WAG's collection a little bit more specifically, and maybe this would be a question for Nicole, but can you talk about the WAG's collection in general and how the WAG got to acquire these works that we have?
Yeah, so the WAG has a pretty interesting history. We're an older gallery within Canada, and the WAG building right now was built in the 70s. And before that, the gallery didn't really have a permanent home. It was kind of like an exhibition space. So anything in the collection before then, it was really run by volunteers, and it wasn't really cared for in the kind of professionalization of museums that we have now. And there isn't great records for a lot of the older pieces like that.
And like when you're saying old, how old are we talking? Just so people have an idea.
Well, I'm referring to old as in old within the collection. So this would have been, we've had them in the collection from like 1912 was when the gallery started to the current building was built in the 1970s. And then the artworks themselves are in the 1800s to about that time, the 1970s. That's where most of the artworks within this project fall. There are some newer ones though. And then within that time, the art gallery now and the University of Manitoba School of Art were the same institution. And then about that time they split and our collection split as well.
I didn't know that. And I think the WAG is the oldest civic art gallery in Canada, correct?
Yeah.
So
we have a very old history within Canada, and a lot of, you know, the well-to-do businessmen within the city, you know, all wanted to have something to do with the Winnipeg Art Gallery. So we have a lot of artworks that, you know, were donated by them, etc.
And so what is your relationship with the collection?
So I am the registrar. So what I do is take care of the artworks after they come into the collection. So I try to keep track of the records of the artwork. So I make sure that we have their history as accurately as possible. I help keep track of where they are located in the storage and keeping the records correct in the database, and helping with research, copyright, just kind of anything to help with the stewardship of the collection, and kind of the information way is my goal.
Right. So you mentioned the database. So we have a collections database. And so maybe can you talk a little bit about how the artworks are categorized within the database? Sure.
So we do have a digital database based on FileMaker, but we also have paper records. In my office, I have huge filing cabinets with a paper record for just about every single artwork, which is thousands. And then those records, those paper records correlate to records within the database. And it's supposed to hold information about who the artist is, when the artwork was created, you know, what kind of paper or canvas or what materials the artwork is on, when the artwork is exhibited, who it came from, the history of where it has been before that, where it's been reproduced, conservation issues. So just kind of anything you can think about that has happened to that artwork in its history should be recorded there.
So it's essentially the life story of each individual artwork piece from its creation to now.
Right. And sometimes it's really spotty, like we don't have a lot of information, and sometimes it's quite comprehensive if we have more information from the donor or wherever we bought the artwork from, or if we got it directly from an artist. But some of those artworks that just kind of came to us when the origins of the art gallery happened and we have no records from them. We don't have anything in there other than, you know, there was this piece of paper with the artwork that said, you know, the artist and title.
So sometimes works come with a title and sometimes they don't. And it's sometimes changed along the course of the history of the piece.
Yeah, actually, kind of anything that goes with the piece can be changed. So we have accession numbers that we assign to all the artworks. And we do that because any of that information can change along the way. So we don't want to really refer to the artworks by their titles or their artists, because any of that information is possibly to change. So those records could get lost along the way. So with the titles in particular for this project, it's interesting because sometimes the artist titles the artworks, but that's not always the case. And especially for the older works, that's probably not the norm. The dealer could have named the artwork, or a curator could have named the artwork, or just the owner could have named the artwork. And we're not really sure of the origins of those names.
Right, and I think that's important to note for this project, that it was pretty clear that, well, I wouldn't say it's pretty clear, but I think that the artworks oftentimes maybe didn't come with the name that it was originally given, and that it had been changed along the way. So maybe we can move in now to how this specific project came about. And that would be with Katrina. So maybe, do you want to talk a little bit about what happened to make this project come to you?
Yes. So I guess about a year and a half ago now, I am the digital media administrator here at the Winnipeg Art Gallery. And we were updating our new website with our collection that was available to go online. And I had noticed kind of front and center on the collections page that there was a painting with an inappropriate title. And it disturbed me. And I remember asking Nicole, just not thinking much of it, but just saying, you know, is there anything we can do about this?
What was the title?
It was A Half Caste and His Family, the Rindisbacher painting, which is now titled A Métis Family. And yeah, I didn't know previously that the artwork titles would have been changed on the way, that wasn't the original title, or likely wasn't the original title. So I wasn't really thinking much of my question. And to my surprise, Nicole said that there probably is something that we could do about it. And from that point on, we conducted an internal audit of our collection and kind of flagged other works that had inappropriate titles or terms in their descriptions and things like that.
And I think around then is when they came to me, Nicole and Katrina came to me and said, you know, we should do something about this. And I was like, yes, we definitely should. Let's apply for some grants to see if we can, you know, make a project out of this and, you know, really do something about it. And, you know, important thing about like when doing projects like this is, and when you're going to bring in knowledge keepers, it's always appropriate to have to pay them honorariums for their time. So you can't just begin a project like this with, you know, no resources and then expect it to be okay. So yeah, then we began the we knew that we had this grant money, but of COVID hit and that we had to delay it a bit. So while we were going about our, regular lives, we sort of were keeping note. And I think there was like an Excel spreadsheet. Like if we came across artworks that carried words that we weren't comfortable with, we were going to add it to the spreadsheet. And so, Katrina, why do you think that now is the right time to do a project like this?
Well, honestly, I think it's past due, especially given the calls to action that were occurring during the pandemic, especially in 2020. And just before then and what continues now, it's the right time. If they're, the best time was 10 years ago or 20 years ago, 50 years ago. So the next best time is now. And given that our core mission is always to preserve and care for the art and present that to the public, as a core mission, it's also one of our missions to educate and foster reconciliation as a museum as well. And I just think it's really important that history is meant to be studied and learned from. And if institutions are afraid to apply these difficult lessons of Indigenous and Canadian history and politics, then these museums risk also being criticized and alienated for not changing and not providing a teachable lesson to its visitors as well. So I think this is just an incredible learning opportunity for everybody involved, for staff, for the public as well.
And so you did you wrote an academic paper for your master's degree about this project, right?
Yes,
So
I did.
You want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So for my paper, I had already, this was already kind of underway at the WAG. We were talking about doing this project. And I thought, well, what a good opportunity to kind of delve into this and look to see if other galleries or museums have come across things like this. Like I was positive it wasn't just specific to the Winnipeg Art Gallery's collection. So I began just kind of searching in other galleries' online collections to see what was available, just typing in, inappropriate words that we had flagged in our collection and seeing if anything came up. And to my surprise, quite a few works came up that were inappropriate. And it just kind of struck me just seeing, in the search engine, 5, 10, sometimes even 20 plus works that would come up online that had these terms that would not really be okay or used in today's context. And that there was no disclaimer. There was nothing saying, this could be potentially triggering, or this is not a word that we use today, or I was just surprised that there wasn't any sort of warning or context around these terms that were being used to describe these artworks, and that this project hadn't been done anywhere else before. So that kind of just, took me down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, and I mean, it's oftentimes how you're introduced to an artwork is the artwork will have a label next to it and it'll have the title and the artist and the date and what it's made of. And if the title is the first way that you interact or engage with that piece, then it tells you the perspective. It gives you the perspective that maybe you don't already have, right?
Exactly. And it just, perpetuates stereotypes, negative stereotypes. And again, without any context as to why that word was used, or that, just nothing to kind of help educate the viewer of the art to have more of a background on that.
Right. Okay, so we have the background of the collection, how the project, just came about really organically, going about, your work. Maybe now we'll move into Marie Anne. Marie Anne is going to give a presentation about this specific project and the work that we undertook to begin to identify and research these projects. So Marie Anne's going to share her screen now.
I hope everyone is able to see this. So yeah, I am coming from a cultural studies background, and that's kind of how I approach this, this project. And so what I'm doing here is I'm just going to offer some reflections, I guess, on this whole process, because I actually had a lot of questions very similar to everyone else about titles and what it means to retitle or rename something, an artwork. So yeah, I just recently graduated from the University of Winnipeg, and I spent quite a few years critically reflecting on the concept of decolonizing institutions, including galleries and museum spaces. So I was curious and really excited about getting involved in this project, especially after hearing Julia's vision for it. So like many people, my initial questions were about the ethics of changing titles. How can we even do this? Obviously, getting rid of a racist and outdated term is a good thing. It makes the gallery a safer space for both gallery visitors and gallery staff who encounter these artworks. But it also kind of led me to other theoretical questions as well, like why is a title so important and why have a title in the first place? Is a title the same as having a name? So a lot of these questions were answered by Riva and Nicole earlier about how titles are like acquired and how they change over time. It's interesting that when I first started this project, I had this notion that titles are fixed and that there's some kind of moral obligation or copyright law that would impede us from changing them. But through my work on this project, I've learned that artwork titles change all the time and that all of this information is kept in the records. And sometimes titles are not even given by artists, and they're given by other museum professionals, other people who encounter the artwork at various moments in the artwork's life. And that actually kind of made this job a little bit harder for me because it's actually really important to me knowing who gave this title to the artwork. But I'll get more into that in a bit. The other thing that changed my perception on renaming these artworks was realizing that I was asking the wrong questions. Instead of just asking how we had the right, I should have been asking through what process these non-Indigenous artists or curators or museum professionals gave themselves the authority to represent our cultures, ways of life, and ways of being in their own terms. Because while some of the words they used are, especially in today's context, considered offensive, what is also offensive and harmful is how these titles frame Indigenous people through colonial discourse. And post-colonial theorist Homi Bhabha writes that colonial discourse produces the colonized as a fixed reality, which is at once an other and yet entirely knowable. It isn't so much about the titles, but the way the titles and the context of the artwork work together. Many of the artists that I've identified in the collection are 19th and early 20th century Canadian painters who are also often ethnographers, self-proclaimed experts on Indigenous cultures. They claim to study Indigenous people and would keep journals with sketches and notes from their travels and their expeditions or encounters. And a few of them were even quite literally involved with the project of colonial expansion in the so-called Canadian Northwest, participating in exploration missions, surveying, and military expeditions. The lens through which these artists observed Indigenous people was a colonial one that often romanticized them as a vanishing race, which was imperative to the Canadian nation-building project to justify occupying and taking Indigenous land. In this way, these titles and artworks are intrinsically tied to a political project, which some may argue that continues to this day. And if you're interested in more on the links between Canadian landscape and ethnographic art and settler colonial expansion, this has been explored by cultural and art theorists in the 1990s, such as Jonathan Bordeaux or Maureen Ryan. And then I just have a quote here. And this is by David Garno, who's a Métis artist and scholar. So quote, "The colonial attitude is characterized not only by scopophilia, a drive to look, but also by an urge to penetrate, to traverse, to know, to translate, to own, and exploit. The attitude assumes that everything should be accessible to those with the means and will to access them. Everything is ultimately comprehensible, a potential commodity, resource, or salvage. The academic branch of the enterprise collects and analyzes the experiences and things of others. It transforms story into text and objects in relation into artifacts to be cataloged and stored or displayed. The primary sites of Indigenous resistance, then, are not the rare open battles between the colonized and the dominant, but the everyday active refusals of complete engagement with agents of assimilation. This includes speaking with one's own in one's own way, refusing translation and full explanations, creating goods that imitate core culture without violating it, and refusing to be a native informant. So basically, I see this project as an active refusal to be looked at in a certain way and on or in certain terms, or to be described in a certain way, a refusal to be the other to another's dominant narrative. And this active refusal is generative. Through the process of finding new names for these artworks, we were able to find a space, an opportunity to become agents in our own stories, and to build kinship and to honor the previously unnamed people in the artworks. What role then does the title of an artwork play in this? And what does it mean to change it? Pahan asked us this question, or a very similar question in our first meeting. My answer was that the title is often, in my own experience, and as others have mentioned, the first place that the viewer will look when they're trying to find meaning in an artwork. The title functions as a tool for interpretation. In that sense, the title actually holds a lot of power because it not only tells the viewer what they're looking at, but how they should look at it. It might direct the viewer to pay more attention to a particular thing in the painting. In this case, a lot of these paintings, the titles are extremely non-specific. They'll be like Indian head, or Assiniboine Indian with pipe, or just Indian chief. This conveys to the viewer that it doesn't really matter who the person is, and that this person can just kind of remain anonymous. And it's just an Indian. Looking at this painting by Frederick Werner, previously titled Indian Encampment, we might gather that the painting is just of a nondescript Indian camp. The viewer might be satisfied with the fact that it is just that. In fact, this title incites the viewer to borrow the particular lens of the artist for a moment to see what the artist saw, and momentarily participates in the act of looking at another. With this new title, Cookum's Camp, we realize that not only has this artwork been renamed, but it has also been reframed. So I'm just going to kind of go into the process of what this project.
Maybe before you move on, we'll just say
Sure.
for people that Cookum is grandmother in Anishinaabemowin. And so I remember when Pahan was naming this piece and she was looking at it and she says, that's a Kunsi, which is grandmother in Dakota, I assume. And then she talked about her, like she's doing laundry and she's probably happy that everyone else is gone and she gets some alone time. And it just really, it breathes life into these people that are depicted in these artworks and humanizes them, because they shouldn't just be nameless Indians. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. So yeah, I was searching the database, and I had a list of keywords that I was going to search. That's included, Indian, savage, all those wonderful words. And many of the artworks that I identified in my first search were actually by contemporary Indigenous artists who are mostly using these terms ironically or like in a reclamatory way. But sometimes the artists were Indigenous and they did not use it in an ironic way, but it was reflective of their time. For example, my 60-something-year-old Cree father still refers to himself as an Indian. So we kind of took those ones off the list. And what we were left with was, primarily works by non-Indigenous artists, and most of them originated in the 19th and early 20th century. And so the next step was looking at each of these artworks and determining to which nation or which nation was being depicted. So I did this in two ways. The artist's biography, so like their approximate location, geographical location at the time of the creation, as well as the visual cues in the artworks. But there were a couple of challenges. I struggled quite a bit with finding information on some of the artists who didn't really have illustrious careers. And as Nicole mentioned earlier, some of the information is a little spotty. So that was definitely a challenge. And then even if I was able to determine where they were, this still may only narrow it down to like 2 or 3 nations. And then from there, I had to rely on how the culture or the nation, the community was depicted. And that's trusting that the artist knew how to take care in how they were depicting these people. So here's an example of that. Alfred, this is a painting by Alfred Weso, and it was previously titled Indian Encampment. Its title is My Family, My People. For example, this painting is, so this is like a 19th century oil painter, and he would be classified as a naturalist. He would paint a lot of landscapes, portraits, and scenes depicting Indigenous people. He was born in France, but then he settled in North America, and he was in Brandon, Manitoba, during the latter part of his life, which is when he painted this. And so I looked at this, and I was looking at images of Dakota camps around this time. And so based on my own research, I made the assumption that it was Dakota. So I did have to acknowledge the limits of my own knowledge as well, and wanted to leave it to knowledge keepers and elders to have the final say, which they did. So I had organized all of the artworks into different nations, and then we met with elders or knowledge keepers from those different nations. But there's quite a bit of crossover, especially with, I feel like there were a lot of paintings and artworks depicting Plains people that were kind of, I think, not really given meticulous attention by the artists. But yeah, I definitely learned a lot in those meetings with the elders and knowledge keepers. And then this one was kind of also very interesting because it was originally titled, or it was at the time titled Indian Wearing Headdress. And I'm assuming that the person who named it this didn't know very much about the culture that it was from. So this one was actually by an Inuit artist. And when we showed it to Martha Pete, who's an Inuit elder, she knew right away that it was actually Nuliayuk, lady in the sea. And that what the person thought was a headdress is actually hair, and also drew attention to the webbed feet. So that was kind of almost comical. And then, there was other things like this painting by William Armstrong that kind of stumped me because I feel like there were different elements that looked more Anishinaabe, and some looked more Dakota. For example, the beadwork patterns, whereas the headdress and the moccasins to me looked more Anishinaabe. So there were definitely crossovers and overlaps there. But yeah, each elder knowledge keeper had a different process for renaming. Martha brought her wisdom and intimate knowledge of her culture and language to the meetings, and had new titles right away. Pahan and Wamdi looked at the people in these artworks as they mentioned something like it's almost like naming a child. And they also held ceremony, but they'll talk more about that. And this was much of the same process with Victor and Brett, who were looking at the Dene and Gitsan artworks, and they had like vast amount of knowledge as well, and it was absolutely amazing. But yeah, for me,
Brett actually was able to identify a painting by a mountain that was in the background because they're from British Columbia, and I get the mountains hold like special significance to their culture, and he was able to identify because the image was a totem pole, and it's called totem pole, but in the background there's a mountain. He's like, I know that mountain. That's, it was pretty amazing to watch.
Yeah, and like you were saying earlier, the meetings with the elders and knowledge keepers were definitely the most rewarding part of this project. Listening to them look at these paintings and describe what they saw was a powerful counter narrative to the ones that I've been reading about all summer. And I listened to Pahan give voice to the aunties and kokums in the paintings, scolding their children, as Julia mentioned, doing their laundry, mourning the death of a loved one. I listened to Wamdi talk about the history of the Dakota, and listened to Victor play the drum and offer a prayer in the meeting room, which signaled, the importance of the task at hand. I listened to Martha talk about how caribou coats are made and ponder over whether a person in the drawing was waiting for seals or char, or maybe trying to spear a fish. And they really brought these photographs, paintings, and drawings to life. So to me, this project wasn't necessarily too much about the end goal of obtaining new titles, but kind of about the process to get there. And it provided an opportunity to develop and maintain relationships to Indigenous communities and bring their stories forward and knowledge forward as well. And I hope that through the new titles, the viewers of these artworks are able to engage with them a little differently in ways that remind the viewer of our humanity, and that we are, agents in our own stories. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Something else that we decided recently was that we are going to include the people that named the artwork in part of the database. So where it says like previously titled Standing Indian Wearing Blanket, we're going to have renamed by Wambadi Wakita or Paha Pesawin, because not only is the knowledge important, but where the knowledge came from is equally as important. So we wanted to institutionalize it in that way too. So maybe now, Pahan, I think that's a great, thank you, Marie Anne, for that presentation. I think it's a perfect segue into maybe hearing your perspective on the project and how you felt being able to give these works names, give these people names.
I think you all did such a good job of explaining the process. Even I'm learning all kinds of things that happened before I came along, which started with a phone call, or maybe it was an email, just Julia saying, well, could you get involved in another project? And actually being involved in this project is not the beginning of the story, because the beginning of the story happened already. And that was even before WAG-Qaumajuq opened, when Julia came to our house and we started to build relationship, and we sat in prayer and we got to know each other. And then we figured out how could me and that nice man that made the opening prayer, that's my husband. So we're a team. Seems like we always, if you get one of us, you get the both of us. And that's kind of what happened. And so we have been walking together and having, we've been on a journey that this is one step of the journey. And so we don't have anything that I've ever heard of a process to name artwork. So all that I can do when we get a request like that is reflect on what are some of the things that we do that could fit with this. And that is giving names. So someone will come and they will say, I would like a name. And so you know that now, people introduce themselves with their name, and then they often have an English name too, but that name that might be in their own language comes through a ceremony. It comes from making a prayer. It comes from a request, exchange of gifts. And then the person who is the one who is giving the name doesn't just take something that that person looks like and just give them a name like that. We have to make a prayer, and we have to wait till that name comes. And then that's gifted, because then the name not only is something that the person carries for the rest of their life, it also is going to inform them on what their rest of their life journey is going to be about. So the name that we carry tells something about who we are and then how we're going to live our life. So that was what I was thinking about when we were asked to give names to the art. So we did that. We received tobacco and we took that and we made prayers here where we live in our way, and more than once. And we went to the gallery and we looked at all these different works of art. And, I don't know too much about art galleries, but I know that the artist of each of the work had a very beautiful gift and was giving the world a gift through this piece that they created. I looked at them closely, and we came home and we made prayers, and I thought maybe I'd have the list and I would be able to name them, and that Wambari and I would sit together, and at the end of that ceremony, we just talked about it, and I said, okay, I'm going to go back over there. So that's what I did. And what I did was I made prayer when I got to the art gallery, and then I took time with each of the pieces, and I wanted to turn something that was hurtful into something that was healing. And it was only hurtful because words were chosen that are derogatory. We understand that they come from a perspective that has been harming us and oppressing of us. And even Marie explained it so well, that this is the object, the subject, and we're not objects, we're people. We're people with the birth of children, and we have dreams, and we have struggles, and we have grieving, and we have all these kinds of experiences of life. We're real people. And if you name that, when you use that name, it turns the person into an object. And then if something is an object, if you harm it or you don't take care and don't act respectful, you can do that because it's just an object. And that is really the experience of the relationship between the settler societies and Indigenous people in Canada. So I come knowing all of that. And I wanted to change it and turn it over and make it a healing both for settlers who might see that and also for us. And so I deliberately took the position of imagining the person who is in that artwork. What were they doing and what were they thinking? And there was one with a husband standing by his wife. And so we made kind of jokes about what she was thinking. Oh, my husband's got me into this again. I have to stand for this. And, just trying to tease a little bit about what she might have been thinking about while she was standing there with not a very happy expression while he's standing just real tall that somebody is, creating this artwork of him. So to do that, to give them life, to give them life and to give them personalities and then just let that name float up inside of me and come through my heart and then into my mind, because I'd already made the prayer and then on my lips. And that's what we call holistic, when you use your heart, your mind, your body, and your spirit. So I did my best to find a holistic, use a holistic process to rebirth a name, just like that artist had birthed that beautiful creation. Then we helped fix it just a little bit to make it so that it's good for everybody. And those scenes in the art, they're beautiful. And for me, I could imagine family members of mine, 200 years ago, who would be beside that water, or, that's my kunshi and she's got a sweater on and the leaves are turning and probably smells so good at that time of year. And, I could imagine it. And that's the gift of art. That's the gift of art. And so I think this collection is important. I also think this step is really important. And I'm really happy to be a part of it. And all of you who came today that are interested, thank you. Thank you. And talk to people about it, because there's other places that we can encourage them, be a role model for other places that need this kind of a correction, course correction that'll be healing for people. Do you have more questions for me, Julia? Because that's, I learned to talk like my husband for a long time.
Well, something that when you were naming the pieces that I really loved was that you were talking about the gaze and how the gaze is others us when it's a picture of us. And I really like how you brought the titles and the names back to encompass who the people are in the work. And that was really, really powerful. There was a couple pieces that you wanted to talk specifically about. And Marie Anne has those images. Would you mind sharing those again? I think the first one is sister. Yeah.
There she is. Well, this was a very important piece from my perspective because Indigenous women have really been treated terribly and been targets and victims of violence since contact, and including our roles and our dignity and all kinds of things taken from us. So as soon as I see an image of one of our women, the first thing I want to do is I want to give her back her dignity. I want to give her back the respect that she deserves. I don't want her to be an image of a missing and murdered Indigenous woman. I don't want that to be who she is. I want her to be somebody that we care about and we love. And so especially the images of women, when I think that's something else that I feel needs tremendous healing, is the way that we view our beautiful Indigenous women, not in a sexualized way, not in a fetish kind of a way, not in all those negative and derogatory terms that we've had to carry all these years, but as an amazing, strong person. And so the best name that she could have, I think from our perspective, is she's one of our sisters, because you love your sister, you laugh with your sister, you even get annoyed with your sister, but you always love her. And so she received that name.
And it positioned her within her family, which is, I think, really important, not just an Indian girl, an object, but she's a sister. She has, a mother, a father, maybe other sisters. And that's really central to who we are as Indigenous folks too, is our family. And it gave her that family, this title did.
Yeah.
And then, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's what I wanted you to do, is to put up this one. And so this, immediately when I saw this, I knew what her name was. And this is another really important example. So Belle Savage, one of our women who is in the nude. And my first thought was, we would never depict one of our women in the nude, because we have all these values around modesty and privacy and those kinds of things, is that we wouldn't do that. We wouldn't do that. But one of the precious teachings we have about woman is that she is sacred. She is sacred because she is connected so intricately to Creator, to bring new life to this world, to be a creator herself. And so she carries that responsibility of that sacredness. And so it's not that her body can't be without clothes, but that's a private moment for her. Maybe she's going to the river or to the lake to wash. That's a private moment for her. But we're just getting to have a look at her private moment. And so I wanted to turn that one around, as well as the feeling really protective of her, that what I was talking about before is the sexualization of Indigenous women, or fetishing, changing that around and reminding that for us, the teaching is that woman is sacred, and she is woman sacred.
Yeah, she was one of the ones that I was most excited to give a name to, because I didn't like that that was the gaze or the title that she had. It bothered me. So it was really important that especially you, that you named her, because I knew that you would feel that too.
Yeah, I wanted to cry right away when I saw her. I felt that emotion, but I also, it was so empowering to give her a name that she can be proud of, and that as soon as someone looks at her, they know in what way they need to view her.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
And then there's another piece that I wanted to talk a little bit about, Running Bear Man. Yes, him. He really struck me when I got to meet him in person for the first time in the room. He just like drew all of my attention and all of my energy. And there's something really special about him. And he was just titled Indian Head, which, you know, doesn't encompass everything that he is. And what I really like about what the Knowledge Keepers did was that they didn't just rename it like Indigenous man or something. They kept, I guess, maybe the word Indigenous out of it and kept it as people. So this is Running Bear Man. And he was just, I don't even know how to really explain it, but I'm really happy that he has his name now. It feels like maybe he needed it. And yeah.
You know, Julia, when I saw him, he looks like he is somebody that was, you know, it's not just a creation from the artist's mind. Like, and so when we first looked at him, I thought, I don't know what his name is. You know, he has a name that perhaps he got in a ceremony in that way, and he lived and worked with that name his whole life. I don't know what that is. So I borrowed a name from my brother-in-law, and I thought, I like my brother-in-law's name. And so that's the name that he got in ceremony, Running Bear Man. That's his name. So I gave it to him. So he gets to carry that now. Sometimes that happens in our way too, is that you might have a name, and then at some point, maybe you're turning from a boy to a man or a girl to a woman, or maybe something's happened. And so your name might be changed. So I thought, well, because we don't know whatever name he was carrying as he was in a physical live form, now he's in this form, he can carry this name for the rest of his life. Or maybe 500 years from now, they'll get some other people in and they'll do names. I don't know. That's what I heard tonight, is that sometimes they get changed.
Yeah.
And that's okay if that ever happens. That's fine.
And then the next piece, the last piece that I'll touch on, and then we can go into some questions if anyone has it, was this piece here, Gotta Get Home. And what really struck me, initially, so many things, but when I saw this one, it was, I thought of the Highway of Tears, the highway between Prince George and Prince Rupert, I think it is, in BC, where a lot of Indigenous folks, especially women and girls, went missing. And then the title, Indian Hitchhiking, it really is dehumanizing in a way. And so to change this perspective to Gotta Get Home is really what these people are trying to do. They're trying to get somewhere. And I think another point is that a lot of times in history, we are unnamed. We carry, status cards with numbers, and we're numbered, and we don't have names, according to the government of Canada. Maybe we're just status Indians with these numbers. And so to be able to give names to these unnamed Indigenous folks was really something that really, really was important to me. It's like taking a little piece back. So that's all for our story. Did anyone have any questions about the process or the project or anything like that? You can put it in the chat, or if you like, you can unmute yourself and ask the group. I will give a little disclaimer that, this project hasn't been done anywhere before. And so we were just sort of feeling it out as we went and did what felt right. So we might not have the answer to your question. Yeah, I'll just open it up now to the group.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Hi. So I just want to say what a great presentation this was. Everyone spoke so well. I really felt like, I understood the whole process beautifully from this. So you guys are a great team. I think it's really exciting. And I also don't know of anyone else doing this. So I hope you're going to publish it in some way so that other people can, follow along or see, use some of your methods. Because it seemed to work really well. I did notice that maybe different knowledge keepers use different ways to name. I thought that was very interesting because I think maybe Marie Anne, you said some people came maybe from a more academic point of view, or some people were naming or describing the scene and bringing it to life. So I thought that was very interesting too, that people would bring different notions to the table. I'm wondering about language. So all the titles you gave us today for this presentation were in English, but will they be in other Indigenous languages as well?
Yeah, well, the Inuit language keeper, she chose to name her pieces in Inuktitut, in her language. And then the Gitxsan knowledge keeper, he chose to name his in his language too. It was important for me to allow the knowledge keepers to name them in whatever language they felt most comfortable with and whatever they wanted to do. So for some people that wasn't English, and some people it was.
Okay, it's amazing. Thank you so much, everyone, for explaining it so beautifully tonight.
We have a question in the chat, and maybe this one's for Riva. Will there be an exhibition at the WAG of the renamed works?
That wasn't something that we were thinking about necessarily in terms of exhibition, but it is interesting that you asked that, because of grouping these works together for an exhibition. Because Katrina was talking earlier about, when you're searching the database, both as a general member of the public on our website, or internally in our more extensive database as a staff person, you don't get the context, right? So some of these works have been exhibited in other exhibitions, and their titles were given a context, or they were put in a wider context of the colonial history of the artist, and hence the name of the title, right? But the impetus for renaming these ones specifically, and certainly they'll be now exhibited with their new titles, but is the fact that all of these titles, their previous titles, were searchable by the general public, right? And staff. And so now when we're searching the database, the new title comes up, right? And that's the first thing that we as staff use and engage with, but also with the public uses and engages with, without having to have the exhibition context fully explained, right? If that makes sense.
There's another question in the chat. Were there any instances of renaming works by Indigenous artists from earlier times? So I think we decided fairly early on in the project that the works that we renamed were going to be from non-Indigenous artists, except in the case with some of the Inuit works where the Inuit artist didn't get to name the piece. And how did we figure that out? Oh yes, we had a meeting with our curator of Inuit art, and we asked them, because I think Marie Anne had a feeling that the artist didn't name those pieces, and then sure enough, a lot of the prints, I guess, were named by the printmaker. And so the artist didn't have agency over the naming of that piece. So we did name some, Martha Pete, the Inuit knowledge keeper, did give names to those pieces.
I had a number of questions, if I may ask. I'm Barb Ford and I volunteer at the WAG when things are open. So I was wondering if you prepared for future reference and to go back on sort of a terms of reference of how this process was derived so that you will be able to, what I've been taking notes and kind of summarizing or trying to condense and coalesce the process you went through. And I'm just wondering, did you create sort of terms of engagement and a terms of reference so that in 50 years time, the terms that we're using now most likely will be changing. Indigenous may no longer be used, just like Aboriginal has changed, half-breed, all of these terms change within a period of time. So terms of reference gives the mindset at that point. So did you do something like that, or will that be done, or?
Well, and something that I sort of touched on earlier was that none of the knowledge keepers used the word Indigenous in their naming. They took the perspective of the person depicted in the artwork, and that would be a grandmother or, you know, trying to get home. So it wasn't necessary. This is just a person, a human. It's not an Indigenous person. So though the word Indigenous will probably change eventually, I don't think that word was ever used in any of the new names, because again, I think it others us. It's like, it's not a man, it's an Indigenous man. And so that was part of the project that I really found amazing, was that we changed the gates.
I would agree. I totally agree with what you've said. I think what it's just putting that explanation in or somewhere noting it would be useful, because in my previous employment working in historical sites for Parks Canada, we have had numerous terminology and exhibitions and so on change over time. So it's just good to have that point of reference and explain exactly what you just said, you know. So that was, because that's incredibly valuable and valid. So that's, yeah. So the other question I had was when how are names going to be changed for the colonial way of referring to peoples? If it's, for example, there's one piece that was in the salon hang a while ago, and it was a Huron chief. It was, I remember, it was a small one, and it was, I'd forgotten the artist. I think it was in the early 1900s, but I'm just wondering, Huron, I believe, is an anglicized term. So will these names be going back to, or be more from the Indigenous community, the member, you know, the group themselves, the location? Is it going to be a more appropriate name added, is what I'm wondering about. So
yeah, there could be. The thing with this project is we had a feeling that there would be more phases after. So for this, I guess this would be phase one. We focused on like the word Indian or savage or Aboriginal. What other terms? There was like half-breed, half-caste, things like that. And then we found out along the way that we're going to need part 2 and part 3 to really address other issues that come up as we look at the collection deeper. And that's definitely one of them.
But Barb, actually, like to your first question, like the record of the project itself and also the previous names and the knowledge keeper who created the new name, that information is all stored in the database and in the files next to where Nicole's sitting right now.
Okay, good. That's good. I was also wondering for, you know, trying to locate some of the paintings that were done. did you consult botanists, geographers at all to get a sense of location? Because I
Well,
know some of the paintings done, they were finished in Europe, you know, with putting in plants that are native to England, not to Canada. So it's difficult to, I was just curious if there were others beyond the scope of that also helped. Maybe that's another phase, I don't know. So.
well, we found that using the knowledge keepers that we consulted with, they were able to identify the land and the people and the waters and the mountains. So we found that our research in consultation with them really worked well.
Great, good. Oh, I have one last question. Sorry, it's generated so many. I don't know. There might be other people who have questions. Sorry to monopolize it.
Yeah, I'm Leona Herzog from the Buehler Gallery in St. Boniface Hospital, and I have a question about artists who are still alive, non-Indigenous artists. And there's really one piece I have in mind. It's done by Jack Butler in 1974. So it's called Eskimo, the 53 color silk screen.
Is that the same one we have, Marie Anne? Oh yeah, we have that one too.
Yeah, I think Jack is still alive. I talked to him in 2018 and he was fine then. And I am wondering, are you going to go back to artists? Because I know he mentioned to me back in 2018 that that was an inappropriate name for the piece. So, you know, I think that would just be so interesting to go back and to talk to artists about work that they had done and that they had named. And of course, the context for when he did it was very different to now, because that's, you know, what, I don't know, 45, 50 years ago. So I'm very curious about that piece in particular, and there are probably others very much like it.
Yeah, Marie Anne, we did some extra research into that particular piece of work because our Inuit knowledge keeper wasn't sure where to go with it. So maybe Marie Anne, you can speak to the additional research that we did.
Yeah, actually, thank you for bringing that one up, because that one was one of the ones that I think it was like the only one that actually the artist was still alive. And so, yeah, I remember Martha looked at it and she's like, I'm not sure if that's one of us. And, but she knew Ruby, who founded was the print shop manager of the Sanivic co-op. And so that was kind of the lead I was going with. And then I found out that Ruby actually passed away. So I tried to get in touch with the Sanivic co-op to find out more information. So actually, I wouldn't mind maybe connecting with you about that artist.
Sure. Yeah, love to. The other person you can talk to is William Noah, because he was around at the Sanivic co-op at the same time in the 70s when they started to do silkscreen printing. And Jack left like 1974 or so. He left Baker Lake and came to Winnipeg, and that particular print was done in Winnipeg. Yeah, but we can talk for sure. You can contact me through the Buehler Gallery, and wonderful, wonderful work you're doing. Just amazing, so exciting. And I think that you're going to see this happening in other galleries across Canada.
I hope so. That would be the best if other galleries could do something similar in their institutions, definitely.
Similar but different.
Yeah, definitely different.
Like every collection is so quirky into itself that the institution needs to sort of develop their own best practices internally, working with their communities, right? And Pahan was saying the other day, and working on establishing their own relationships between their institutional staff and their community elders and knowledge keepers and appropriate people, right?
Yeah, it's like Pahan mentioned that that's the first step, is to build that relationship based on reciprocity and respect, and not to just like approach a knowledge keeper, but to, you know, build up that relationship with them. And there's a relationship of trust, and then you can ask them about these certain things. So that would be my recommendation for other institutions that want to do something similar, is to start with building relationships with the Indigenous nations of the land that that institution exists on, and knowledge keepers from the nations that exist within the collection of that gallery. That would be the starting point.
Yeah, and sorry, just to add to what you were saying, Julia, I think that like in museum communities, we kind of try to want to like protect our collections from having outside people come in. But I think this project really highlights that it's so important to trust like non-gallery staff or non-like museum people. And it was so beautiful watching Pahan and the other elders like look at the artwork and take the renaming so seriously. And the names the artworks were given are just amazing. They've made me really rethink how some of these artworks that I've seen so many times, like have a whole new view of them. So I think that's what you were saying about building trust and then just allowing other people into the collections, and how you work within the collections and bringing people in is really important.
Is there any other questions before we end the discussion?
I would like to thank all the staff that are working at the WAG for just taking this project on so seriously and taking such good care of it. So thank you very much. And when you have a good idea, I think it's very wise to take it to Julia and say, what should we do? And she will say, let's make something happen, because that's the kind of woman she is. So thank you for doing that, all of you. And I'm proud to be a part of it.
And yeah, I just want to acknowledge Katrina and Nicole, because if you guys hadn't brought this to my attention, this project might have never happened. So I think that's true allyship. Like, it'd be so easy to just, you know, continue in your work and the status quo, but we recognize something's wrong and we need to fix this. So that's that was really brave and courageous of you to do that. So thank you very much. You've definitely changed the gallery.
Good job. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night.